Laster. I'm the director of the Woods Hole Film Festival, and for those of you who are at the festival for the first time, which I don't know if it's anybody, but you people back there can't raise your hand. Well, and you're filmmakers, so you can't raise your hand, and you guys can't raise your hands. So forget my curtain speech. No, seriously, thank you so much for being here. This is day 3 of the 34th Woods Hole Film Festival. And it's been an amazing 2.5 days so far, so thank you for being here. Could the weather be any hotter? We just don't know. It is Cape Cod in the summertime though. So a little bit about the festival. The festival takes place each summer from the last Saturday of July through the first Saturday of August. During this time we screen anywhere from 115 to 150 films selected from submissions that we received from around the world. This year we received nearly 1,000. The submission group spends the better part of the year reviewing the films and putting together the program. And it's a program that we think reflects the best in emerging independent film. So if you're here for the festival week, make sure you take a look at the program. We have incredible films. I think many people in this audience are filmmakers with films in this festival. So get a chance maybe to see each other's films, get a chance to know each other, and really see all the films that you can, because we have an amazing array of films this year. People have commented to me nonstop how grateful they are to have the films here that we have this year. And this year, more than ever, it seems like people need film festivals. I'm sure it's not just here, but people are so excited and so happy and so grateful to be able to see stories like this, where most people don't get a chance to see them in this fashion, which means on a screen with people, with the filmmakers, in a community that's dynamically related to the festival and that cares about the festival. And so those of you who may be new to Woods Hole is a village in the town of Falmouth, but while it may seem small in landmass, it's very large in impact, and the impact is both in the science world and the culture world. And in the science world, we have the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution with many buildings here on Water Street and in their Quissit campus. And then right down the street, we have the Marine Biological Laboratory. We also have the Woodwell Climate Research Center right up Woods Hole Road, the NOAA Fisheries down the street, U.S. Geological Survey. And so people in Woods Hole work at the cutting edge of many science issues, particularly around climate and oceans. And so while you're here, one of the things that we hope you'll get a chance to do is also learn more about Woods Hole. We're trying to put together a tour for filmmakers this week so that you can learn about what happens here in the institutions. So in addition to the screenings, we're really thrilled each year to be able to have master classes. And the master classes are an opportunity for people who are experts in the field to come here and relay their wisdom to us, and for you to get a chance to ask them questions. And so Chris and Jonathan approached us probably, I don't know, sometime in February or March, and they're like, do you guys care about music? Well, they didn't actually ask. And do you think that people care, documentary filmmakers care about how music relates to their films? And so this is a Woods Hole thing too. And we were like, are you kidding? Of course they do. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever watched a film with the sound down. It's so different than when you turn the sound back up and you hear the layers of sound that go into a film, and then particularly the music. You realize that without the music, most films would be unwatchable. And so these guys, this is what they do. They're experts in their field. Chris works at Donaldson. Tell me, what's the name of the firm?
Chris Perez.
Yeah. In LA. And so they do a lot of different kinds of legal work, but in the music space, it's a lot of licensing. It's a lot of helping filmmakers to navigate the legal pitfalls, and there are so many when it comes to making a film with music in it, especially if you use archival footage or anything around licensing, and so he'll talk about that. And then Jonathan Finegold is a music supervisor, and he can talk about what that means, because it can be really daunting, particularly if you have a lot of music in a film, or if you don't really know where to start and don't have friends who are musicians who want to make music for you. It can be really daunting to figure out how to get the right music for your film. So they're going to spend about an hour talking about that, and then they'll open it up for questions, but they're also here tomorrow. Or maybe they're leaving right now, we don't know.
We'll be there.
They're here tomorrow, and we'll have meetings available in 20-minute sessions for filmmakers. So if you have a project that you're working on, or if you have particular questions related to projects that you want to work on, sign up and come meet with them. It's a great opportunity, and we're so thrilled to have you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
One last thing. If you haven't been here, this is the Woods Hole Community Hall. It's an old building. We don't have air conditioning. We have windows. But the restrooms are through that exit sign and down the stairs if you need them. Thank you. And turn off your cell phones.
Thank you so much, Judy. Everybody, it's lovely to be here. This is my first time in Woods Hole, my first time in Cape Cod. On my third day, I love it here. And I'm actually here with my wife, Maria, and I was telling her yesterday that this is one of the most unique festival experiences that I've had so far, just because of the energy, the welcoming nature of everyone in town that's here for the festival, whether it's filmmakers, people who are coming into town to watch films, the volunteers. It's very much a welcoming community that also seems collaborative on an artistic level. So from the programmers to Judy to all the volunteers, just want to say thank you up front. It's been a really great experience so far.
Yeah, I second that. Especially the volunteers. Really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce Jonathan very quickly. Jonathan Finegold of Finegold Music. With over 25 years of industry experience, Jonathan Finegold is a Guild of Music Supervisors award-winning music supervisor, known for his work on Emmy-winning documentary Little Richard, I Am Everything. Finegold specializes in the indie film and TV world, with a focus on documentaries and indie features. His approach to music supervision involves hand-selecting songs, securing the rights to those songs, hiring composers, orchestrating the recording and production of original music, arranging soundtrack deals, and coordinating fair use. We're going to talk about all of these things. He's a founder of Finegold Music, a boutique sync licensing agency in New York City, which represents a large number of indie titles for sync, with placements in advertisements, films, TV series, trailers, and more. He's an adjunct professor and minor coordinator in the music industry program at Marymount Manhattan College and has taught at NYU for over a decade. He's presented and conducted masterclasses at music industry conferences around the world, including BIME in Spain, Reeperbahn in Germany, BIME in Colombia, CMW in Toronto, and more. Welcome, Jonathan.
Great. Thank you. Chris specializes in all aspects of the law firm's practice, including representing independent producers and production companies through development, financing, production, rights clearances, and distribution. He has helped hundreds of productions secure the E&O insurance necessary to distribute their films and has established himself as an advocate for artists' rights. In addition to representing filmmakers, Chris serves as counsel to writers, podcast producers, radio personalities, museums, and foundations. Chris is also co-author of the 5th edition of Clearance and Copyright, the industry's leading book on rights clearances in film and television. He is often asked to provide expert authority onto entertainment law, copyright, artificial intelligence, and other cutting-edge legal issues by various podcasts and publications, including The Hollywood Reporter, Variety, and Forbes. Prior to working with Donaldson, Califf, and Perez, Chris worked for California Lawyers for the Arts, Technicolor, and the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard Law School. He serves as a board member for the International Documentary Association and on the advisory board for the Generative AI Initiative of the Archival Producers Alliance. Welcome, Chris Perez.
Thanks. So to get started, I think we really wanted this to be a conversation, but a collaborative conversation, so that everybody gets the most possible out of this hour. So maybe by a show of hands, we got to get a sense of how many directors are in the room.
And feel free to raise your hand for more than one
Right.
thing, especially in
The hyphenates. Producers, same hands, right? Writers, wow, okay. Lawyers, all right. So no questions from you guys.
Actors? Any actors here? Okay.
Okay.
And there
Students? Students?
And are there any musicians, composers? Okay, okay. Excellent. Did we miss anyone?
That's right.
Festival
program.
There's two of you at least, okay?
Right.
Educators, okay, like a professor, an adjunct, or high school. Okay, great. Great, super. And we also wanted to know if you can raise your hand around how many people feel or think they're going to ask a question after. We just want to be able to give ourselves adequate time for everyone. Okay, cool. Cool. And I'm sure some others will figure out things along the way as well. Okay, super.
So I think to start, let's start from the beginning, right? And by the way, this is focused on documentaries, but I think we can get into a lot of issues that scripted producers and directors deal with because, of course, doesn't matter whether you're doing a doc or a scripted film, you're probably thinking about music. So, Jonathan, you have a lot of experience as a music supervisor. If you're a film producer, particularly a documentary film producer, when are you starting to think about music, and what are the different kinds of ways that a documentary film can integrate music into the film?
So, two-part question there. So the first part, unfortunately, a lot of people seem to think about music after the fact, and it's really not a great idea. It's best to think of music right up front. As you're cutting, as you're working and creating this vision, you want to be thinking about how you want to supplement it from an audio standpoint. And if you can get ahead as far as the audio and the music goes, then you put yourself in a much better position financially down the road. Because a lot of times we get approached and it's in post, and then they think about music, and then they realize they don't really have it in the budget. And then unfortunately, it becomes a much harder job to do, and then the director typically doesn't get exactly what they had hoped for. And then the second part to the question is sort of what are the different ways to tie in music to your project. So a lot of people in this room, I'm assuming, will bring on composers, or they'll compose themselves. Another common way is what we call music libraries. There's a handful of different libraries where you can pull music from it very inexpensively, and often the music is generic sounding, but can serve a purpose. And then one of the special things is music licensing, where you could secure songs by bands that are current to today, whether it's Beyonce or Post Malone, or whether it's old music from Connie Francis, or even further back, Cab Calloway. And I think that one of the things I encounter a lot is everyone just sort of feels that that's hands off. that it's going to be too expensive, it's going to be not clearable. And I think that we're here today to discuss that besides the idea of fair use, there's other ways to secure that music. And I'll give you some actual figures of what you can secure music for. And I hope that you'll be somewhat surprised. I hope.
And you mentioned one of the ways that you work music into the film is a composer, right? So a composer, from my experience as a lawyer, often the first time I see a cut of the film is when I'm reviewing it for overall rights clearance issues, which includes music, but it might also be for fair use, it might be for defamation, invasion of privacy. One of the things that I often hear in those early rough cuts is a temp score, right? And maybe you can explain a little bit what a temp score is, how it functions for filmmakers who haven't yet figured out who they're going to hire for a composer, and then some of the complications that might arise because of that.
Sure. So temp score, it depends on how big your team is, and if you're editing yourself as a director versus if you actually have an editor. But a lot of times that editor or director will edit in existing score that John Williams, that Ennio Morricone, different people that are famous that you've heard, and you temp it in. And it's just to sort of kind of complete your rough cut and be able to understand that where the audio might be heading. On larger budget projects, let's say that there's a documentary for $2.5 million. I know it's a dream, but it happens. You could actually have a composer will bring in a music editor, and what they'll do is they'll edit temp score that helps the composer determine in what way they're going to go. So it gives them a feeling ahead of time of where audio might come in, how it's going to sound, what's the moment they're seeking. Is it romance? Is it a super inspirational moment? And so this initial temp is quite vital to set the direction. And then when you temp it in, it might not work, and so then you can make changes accordingly. And then when you start to show it for other people to be able to give notes, then you sort of have the direction of where you're heading. Now, Chris mentioned where there sometimes can be a problem is what we call temp love. And it's not just Valentine's Day that it happens. It's basically when a piece of score by someone very famous is put in and it starts to kind of stick and people like it, and they just sort of not really, no one talks about that it's bad and we have to change it. And then all of a sudden they realize, okay, well now we need to figure out this piece, and maybe the actual composer tries it and it doesn't work, it doesn't sound as good. Or they say, you know what, let's try to actually get the rights to that. And they find out like, oh, well, that was used in Star Wars or that was used in Rocky 3 or something. Right. And then you realize that A, as a creative person, you don't really want that. And B, that it's prohibitively expensive. Yeah.
And I imagine temp love can also occur with licensed, potentially songs that maybe there was an intention to license it or not. Either way, it's still in the cut, and unfortunately, it's maybe too expensive or it's not licensable.
Right, so what could happen is the way the editor might be editing in some temp score, they also might be editing in some actual temp songs. Let's say it's the end title, let's say it's a montage, let's say there's an inspirational moment, and they decide they want to use an actual song. They try something and they put it in, and then unfortunately it's a song that might not be clearable, or it's a song that you realize is very expensive. It's some like rare B-side to a Led Zeppelin song or something, and you fall in love again, basically. Then you get more temp love. So you need a divorce.
Right. And in terms of your, you said that getting involved as a music supervisor earlier rather than later is the best way to go. As a filmmaker, obviously, there's all sorts of budget limitations, especially in today's climate. I, wrestle with the same thing with producers who say, well, we'd love to hire you right now, but unfortunately, now's not the right time. We don't have enough money for a lawyer. Ideally, when are you stepping in? Or I guess the question would be, not ideally, but at what point are you most often stepping in where you feel like you can still do everything that you want to do successfully as a music suit?
Sure. Look, the earlier the better, always. Especially if the project plays itself into music. Maybe it's about a small band from a local high school and how inspirational this band is and helps keep people off the streets. But you realize how important music is at that moment. The earlier we are engaged, the better. And I think that people will often get scared from a financial standpoint. And, we work, gratis? Sometimes we might take something on if it has an important meaning to us, to me, if there's maybe some back-end potential where you might have a piece of it, or maybe it's an additional credit I can get besides music supervisor. Maybe I can get a co-production credit, or maybe it's just minimal money. It's 10% of what I might make, but it's in good faith. And it's also where I feel like the director or the producer has a lot of potential and they have great ideas, or there's just a great connection with that person. Because I do feel that oftentimes it's the tip of the iceberg, and your creativity, that's just begun right there. And you're in your first film or second film, and there's 8 more, 10 more you're going to have, and hopefully you're going to work with the people that help bring you up. So it's always worth a phone call to have that conversation. Where I do find it gets messy is when producers start to try to clear the music or start to try to do the job themselves, and they start calling the record labels. And I would say we get, 20% of our work that way, and it really, it makes the job a mess because they've already started to contact the record company and they don't know the language and how to speak to them, and they don't know what the typical fees are. So the record company is only looking for money. And so they're going to throw a number at you that would be higher when I know the market rate, because I'm clearing a song a week, on average. And I know exactly, what we can, not exactly what we can get, but a range of what we can get. Because it depends, there's a lot of parameters of what it might depend on. And so people, especially producers, will start to call, and then they'll realize, I can't do this. And then they'll eventually, come to hire us, and we could have saved them money from the beginning if they would have come to us. And that's a very common first-time producer sort of mistake.
Yeah, that was one of my rookie mistakes that I was going to raise, is bringing someone like you in too late after having reached out to potential licensors.
Do you want to talk about that now, the rookies?
Yeah, that's it. I can't tell you how many times that's happened, and it doesn't just happen on the music supervision side. It also happens on the legal side, and not just with respect to music. I'm working on a film right now where the filmmaker used release forms that just didn't work, right? And unfortunately, we're having to unwind all of those, which just creates more work and more cost. So what I would say is, especially with the use of forms, right? Because so many filmmakers, depending on the type of film, you actually can get pretty far without a lawyer, right? But if you're working with a form that is not what a distributor would want to see, right? Or it is limited in terms of the kinds of exploitation that you can engage in, then you've got to unravel everything once you get those releases. You got to go back to people, and maybe they've changed their minds, right? Same thing would be with music, right? And especially with music, where the different kinds of media that you license from a particular licensor is actually a big part of the negotiation, right? So you may have heard the term all media worldwide in perpetuity, right? Everybody wants that. Unfortunately, that's very expensive, right? Especially with music, especially with very popular music, right?
Right.
So, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but one of the red flags, or at least the mistakes that I see, is a filmmaker, let's just say it's her first film, and she goes into it thinking, well, I want to distribute this via public television. Like, I have a contact at PBS, I know exactly where this is going, and so I'm only going to license music for public television and maybe some educational rights, broadly speaking. They go to a film festival, they get into Tribeca, they get a sale. All of a sudden, now they're going to be on Netflix. So let's look at your music licenses. Uh-oh, right?
So then what happens is Netflix looks at it and says, oh, well, you don't have the rights to stream. And then the music supervisor and the lawyer have to get back in the mix. You have to pay us again, or extend our agreements, or extend because our efforts now have to get doubled. And it becomes a little messy, or it hinders the Netflix deal. And Netflix all of a sudden backs out and says, you know what? This particular film is really music intense, and now it's going to cost you X amount of money, and that's not going to be worth it then for the advance that we're giving you. And so it can become a problem. So what we do as music supervisors, and another rookie move, is when the producers will just want festival rights only. Because you're thinking, some of you in this room perhaps, are thinking, oh, if we sell the film, we'll let Netflix or we'll let PBS deal with the music clearances. And maybe there was a point in the industry where they might, and maybe if it's a bidding war, they would take that into account and deal with it. But they typically want a turnkey, simple solution. And so when you have a competent team behind you, attorney, music supervisor, then what we would do as a music supervisor is we clear it for festivals, not a problem, but then we also have options to clear it for all media, excluding theatrical, and then we also have theatrical options that we put in, and we usually do like 100 screens or less, and then we'll do unlimited theatrical. So we put all these options, so when the record company approves the song, we'll say up front, okay, we're only taking festival, and we make that payment. Sometimes we'll take all media excluding theatrical, which includes festivals, and then we won't worry about theatrical until later. But then it just becomes an invoice and a payment. You don't have to go back to clear the rights to the music. Mm-hmm. And you will fight with the record company, and sometimes they'll say, oh, you're a first-time filmmaker, or you don't know what's happening, so we're just going to give you festival rights. And then when you have success at that festival, you'll come back to us. But you don't ever want to be put in that position. You ideally don't want to be put in that position, because then your leverage is limited at that point.
Another rookie mistake. Has anybody heard of the term most favored nations rate? Okay.
You want to define it?
Yeah, it can be kind of a complicated concept. The basic idea is that if you're the licensor, you own some piece of music. I've fallen in love with a track that you own, right? And I want to put it into my film. And you say, well, I own the publishing rights and I want $15,000. And I say, well, I only have $50,000 total to license all of the music in the entire film. So 15 is out of my range, but you know what? I have 5 for you, and I promise I'm not going to pay anybody more, right? So I'm going to give you a most favored nation rate, an MFN rate, to say, to the extent that I license a song for $7,500, you get $7,500. But my strategy is to license every song for $5,000 or less, right? Now, the pitfall here is if you have, let's just say, 5 tracks, and you license 4 of those tracks for the $5,000 MFN, most favored nation rate, you get to the final track, and all of a sudden, that licensor says it's $15,000, and I'm not interested in the MFN. What do you do, right? That is a nightmare scenario that we've probably both been in.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you deal with that kind of situation?
So we like to create most favored nations, and again, it's a way to ask for a discount, but explain to everyone that no one's getting gypped here. Everyone's being fairly paid. We're independent. This is the situation, and there are exceptions to most favored nations, and the typical exception is if your song is going to be used as a title track. So that person would warrant a higher fee, and they wouldn't have to get the $5,000. There are some sneaky ways around things that we've encountered in the industry. And that's sort of why you need a music supervisor. There is some, I think we're getting really in the weeds a little bit, but there's something where like Frank Sinatra or Elvis Presley or some of the big artists want what's called a vocal fee. And it's a separate fee that goes to their estates. And that allows that record company to get a higher fee and not mess up the favored nations. So that's why you need 2 Sherpas to kind of walk you through these things, because it can be complex. But MFN is a good friend to music supervisors, because we sort of try to set the stage and let people know, look, this is an indie film. We've got 10 songs we want to get, and we've got $1,000 a song, and that's just what it is. But everyone's being paid fairly, and we're all being paid the same amount. And you can get people to kind of buy into that sometimes, especially if it's something like you think, no way, I can never get such and such, this particular artist. But you'd be surprised,
Right.
Other rookie moves? We have anything else?
Well, one thing I wanted to explore was the different ways that you can engage a composer, right? And we always like to talk about these issues in the context of very limited budgets. We both work in the independent film space, so it's constantly a part of the conversation. How do we work with a very limited budget while also getting to use the music that we want in our films, right? So what I'll often see is, let's say we have a producer of a documentary, the budget is $750,000, great film. The producer and the director talk to their top choice composer, and that composer is very interested. They've watched the film and they love it. Unfortunately, that composer, their going rate is $100,000, right? Which is more than 10% of the budget. So that's not going to work, right? So then as a producer, I try to get creative and I say, well, listen, maybe I can pay you on a deferred basis, right? And the composer says, well, I have a family. Unfortunately, this is my going rate. It's $100,000, right? So where do I go from here? And where I've seen a lot of flexibility lately, which I think is actually very convenient for the producer and the composer, is going from a model where the producer owns the music that is produced or composed for the film to a licensing model, right? And what we've seen is composers will often charge a little bit less as an exchange for owning their music, right? And I happen to personally think that this is the way to go. I think that composers should own their music. Producers should have the right to use the music in the film and advertising and any kind of ancillary uses that a distributor wants to use. But, you know, it's the composer's music. And maybe 3 or 4 years from now, they want to use it for a different purpose. So as lawyers, we've done a lot of these licensing deals, right? And maybe that $100,000 composer will only charge 50 or 60 in exchange for owning their music. Now, there's a couple of pitfalls here, right? If your film is being commissioned by one of the big streamers, one of the delivery requirements is that they own the music on a buyout basis, right? So they're going to have a form that you have to use for the composer. The composer is going to have to deal with that or not. On the flip side, if you're with one of those streamers and they're commissioning the project, your budget's probably bigger than what I just mentioned. But if you're producing it on an independent basis and you have more flexibility, then you can revert to a license model where the composer owns the music. And it's a completely different form. Talk to your lawyer about the 2 different kinds of agreements that you can use. But the basic idea is the producer can use the music however they want in the film. They can use that composed music in advertising and promotion. The distributor can do anything that they want as long as it's connected with the film. But the composer owns the music, subject to, usually there's a holdback against the composer being able to use the music in another film, right? Because you can imagine your distributor picks up the film, they're very excited about the music, they put it in the trailer, this grand score, and then 2 months later, you know, another trailer comes out and it's the same score for a different, maybe competing film. They don't want that, right? So we would essentially tell the composer, you can own the music, but there's a restriction on your ability to use that music in another film for, let's say, 2 or 3 years after the premiere of this film. So that's a creative way that we've been seeing, you know, composers being engaged when we need to save a little bit of money.
And furthermore to what Chris said, that is a less expensive alternate is, let's say it's a documentary being shot in Jamaica, and you really want a Caribbean sound, and you can connect with some composers that are down there, and they might have a library that exists already, where they have hundreds of cues that exist in their drives and in their computer systems, and they could provide those to you and license those to you, and it can be even a further less expensive option because these cues already exist. The composer would still own it. You still get your Caribbean vibe and your flavor that you need. And so a lot of top composers have these libraries that you could access, and it might give you that sound that you're looking for, and then you edit in accordingly. And in many cases, you could also get stems. So does everyone know the term stems? So stems is an audio term where if the score has hundreds of different elements to it, you can get separation, just horns, just ad-lib, oohs and ahs, just string instruments, just percussions, and then your editor can then move around things with those actual stems and help enhance a particular scene. So you're not subject to the exact score as it was recorded. So you get a lot of flexibility. So there are some of these sort of alternative creative ways where you can hire composers that are well sought. So I guess that sort of leads to this, like, don't be afraid. A lot of times I feel people are afraid to, they feel like licensed music, oh, no way, that's way out of my league, I can never get that song, it's going to be so expensive, or music's so hard to clear, or oh, that composer would never work with me. We as music supervisors, and Chris as an attorney, I mean, we take chances on projects. We take chances on people we believe in, and as does some record companies, some music publishing companies. The big, we call them the big boys, the big labels. they don't own everything that's in the marketplace. There are smaller independent record companies that do own world music from all eras, from all styles, from the teens and 20s to present. And yeah, sure, Led Zeppelin is owned by, part of Warner Brothers, and it's expensive. But that doesn't mean there's not a band called The Pretty Things out of London that kind of sounds very similar to them and would give you that same vibe. And we can probably get that for like a couple $1,000s for you,
Well, what if you're making a documentary about one of those big bands, right? And they are connected to one of the major publishing companies, major record companies, et cetera. I'm the director of that, and I tell you, Jonathan, listen, don't worry about it. My cousin's best friend's brother's friend
Rookie mistake.
is best friends with the drummer. And so we can get the music for free or for very cheap.
So another one of these rookie mistakes is when you use music because someone has told you, don't worry, it's okay, he's my friend, or or they know that group. Most likely someone has paid for that recording and owns it. And so never take that as, don't accept that. You want to have it in writing. You want to be able to get it signed off. Even if you don't have a music supervisor hired, still make sure your attorney has given you the proper paperwork. Another rookie mistake we hear is, oh, that person sang in that scene, but it's fine. It's covered under their sign off to appear in the film. No, maybe what they speak is covered, but if they decide to sing a melody for some reason, and great story, I was working on this TV series for Netflix. It's about the New York hospital system called Lenox Hill Hospitals. It was called Lenox Hill. And there was a doctor, and they were following him around the cameras, and he turned to the camera and he's like, I gotta go. I'm late for a very important date. I'm late. And for months, it kept getting by everyone. And I'm like, that's Disney. Like, that's like Alice in Wonderland or something. It's like, no way. So we went to start to clear it. And then I said, I got to be honest. I said, Disney is really challenging in these situations. I said, I'm happy to charge you to go look into this, but do you feel you can live with editing it out? Like an hour later, they're like, it's out. Like, they didn't want to deal with it. It didn't enhance the scene. It was a cute moment, but it would have cost thousands of dollars. And you as directors, producers, writers, you have to pick and choose where you want to spend your money on music. And that was not a place to do that.
That actually happens quite a bit where I'm reviewing the film and I see someone's riffing, right? The term riffing is kind of, who knows what it means, right? Because it could be the example that you just gave, but it could really just be, hey, I was thinking about different notes and put them together, and I play the guitar, I was really just riffing. This isn't an existing song. What we can often encounter is not being able to determine with certainty whether it's truly riffing or it's truly, the situation that you're talking about. I worked on a Terrence Malick film maybe 8 years ago, and the way he shoots is it's scripted, but the actors have a lot of flexibility to riff. And Ryan Gosling was playing guitar throughout that film. And I watched the 6-hour cut in which he was with for about 30 minutes. Luckily, by the time we got to 2.5 hours, it was really only 2 or 3 cues that we couldn't figure out, even with the help of a musicologist, what this song was. So we finally went to Ryan's reps and he said, I have no idea. I don't remember. This was 6 months ago. I'm not going to represent whether it's a real song or not. So, fortunately, we had the musicologist, run a report. She worked with some people in her office, and she was able to essentially opine that she didn't think that it amounted to any existing composition. Now, I only bring up that story because that was a huge process. That was a pretty healthy budget where we could hire an expert musicologist. But, you know, if you're a documentary producer on the ground and you're shooting verite footage and you're, I don't know, let's just say you're at a farmer's market and somebody just happens to be, you know, playing a little ditty on the guitar, probably a good idea afterwards, once that person signs a release, say, can I just, you know, what songs were you playing? Do you know, I happened to catch you when you were playing this, so that you get that in the moment directly from the source at the time that it's happening, versus many months on when that person probably didn't even remember that you were filming and they have no idea what they were playing. So it's kind of like a script annotation in the scripted context. Easier to do all of the work at the time when it's fresh in your memory, fresh in the person who you're capturing on screen, so that you understand exactly what you're picking up in audio.
Yeah, and to sort of answer your question about if you're actually working on a project that is about a musician or about a band, or you know, there are a lot of pitfalls to it, and you really have to be careful. Typically, you try to get some estate approval so they know that you're working on a project. You don't always need it. Really, that's something to discuss with the attorney.
And estate approval is when the artist is no longer around.
Correct, right, exactly.
Right.
And then you have to look at all the songs that you might be interested in, and you need to get those cleared prior to you starting the project. Because if you start interviewing and start shooting and start doing things, and then you realize, oh, well, I didn't get the rights to this song, this song, this song, why am I asking questions about those songs? That was just a real waste. So you want to really lay out a game plan when it involves something that's very music intense. It could be about a dancer, and the dancer has certain dances and things they do to certain songs. So you want to make sure that you get those cleared ahead of time. Another thing that we've encountered, and this isn't as much, well, I guess it can be if you're setting up a shoot for a doc, but is if you want people to, say, dance to something specific, or you want someone to sing in the shower about something, or you want to get those rights to the song prior. Now, you typically only need the publishing rights, which means the songwriters need to approve it. So you're not spending money on a shoot if you don't have that right ahead of time.
And just to clarify, you mentioned different sets of rights. What is the difference? What are the two sets of rights that you typically need when you're using an existing recording?
So you're going to need what we call recording rights or master rights, which is the actual record company, whether it's Sony Records or Fueled by Ramen. You know, it's those classic record companies. Then you need the publishing rights, which represent the songwriters. So when you're clearing a Beatles song, which is possible to clear, you would get the recording rights from their label, and their label is owned by Capitol Records, which typically would go through Universal Music. And then a lot of the songs, not all Beatles, but a lot of them are Lennon and McCartney songs, and they're controlled by Sony Music Publishing. But if you were to take on Here Comes the Sun, which is a George Harrison song, that would go to a different publishing company because he's signed to someone else.
And there can be multiple owners of those publishing rights, right?
Yes, publishing can be, in other words, you can clear an Isley Brothers song, and there's like 9 Isley Brothers with like different entities and different companies, or a lot of the 80s, 90s hip hop and rap has samples in it. And so you would have to clear the original writers of the sample along with the current artists themselves. And we've cleared songs. The most famous sort of song that people will talk about is LL Cool J, Mama Said Knock You Out, which is very popular and used a lot because of sort of the boxing analogy. And there's like 22 writers on it, and like 7 publishing companies to have, or maybe 8 publishing companies you have to go to. And because it has a lot of samples, which are producers that have taken bits and pieces of older music.
Maybe we should talk about fair use a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so has anybody...
Show a video?
Yeah, well, we'll get that ready.
Okay.
Has anybody here heard of fair use? Okay, right. So fair use is an exception to the copyright law, right? The U.S. copyright law grants exclusive rights under copyright to the author or the creator of a work, right? So we're not just talking about music, we're talking about paintings, films, books. As soon as you put something creative and original into tangible form, right? You write a story on a napkin. You don't have to register it with the Copyright Office, although it's a good idea to do so. You have copyright ownership over that story the moment that you create it, right? Same thing goes for music. As soon as you create that song, you put it into tangible form, you own it as the copyright owner. And this is great, right? Authors should be in control of the rights to their works. But when they created the copyright law, they realized they had to make this consistent with the First Amendment, right? And they had to create a copyright law that made it so that authors are incentivized to continue creating works, and that creators who are looking back at existing works or want to comment on or criticize existing works have the ability to do so without getting permission in some cases. So that's why we have the fair use doctrine. It exists as an exception to the copyright law where you can use bits and pieces of existing copyrighted works without permission and without payment to the copyright owner, right? So if I want to review a book, and let's just say I'm going to pan the book, right? I want to be able to make references to excerpts of the book. If I'm reviewing a film, I want to be able to show a clip from the film in order to talk about it. Whether it's positive or negative, doesn't matter. It's not a part of the fair use analysis, right? So when we're looking at fair use, the courts have essentially built in a balancing test in determining whether it qualifies as fair use or it's just copyright infringement. And what we found is those 4 factors are pretty difficult to apply on the ground, right? They're pretty esoteric if you just look at them on their face. So what we did is we looked at the case law, and we found that courts are essentially asking the same 3 questions over and over again, right? Are you using the material to illustrate a point that's being made in the film? Are you only using as much as is reasonably appropriate to make your point, right? So how much are you using in comparison to the whole? And the third question is about context. Is the point that you're making clear to the average viewer? And if you can answer all 3 questions yes as a documentary filmmaker, whether it's footage, it's a piece of music, it's artwork, then you're going to be in pretty good shape when it comes to fair use. You'll still want to talk to a lawyer, especially when you get closer and closer to that, a late rough cut or a fine cut, to confirm what you suspect is fair use, because it's one thing for you to think it's fair use, it's another thing for me to think it's fair use, but I write an opinion letter, it goes to an insurance carrier, and this policy is called an errors and omissions insurance policy, and virtually every distributor is going to require that. They'll look at the opinion letter and say, okay, well, Chris thinks that it's fair use, and so we're going to cover this under insurance. And that's important because you might have an angry copyright owner out there who doesn't think that it's fair use, or maybe doesn't know about fair use and could still bring a claim. And in that case, it's just like any other insurance policy. They bring a claim, you know what your out-of-pocket deductible is, and you and your distributor have the protection of the policy, right? So when it comes to fair use in music, there's really 3 different ways that I've seen fair use come in handy, right? So one is very related to what I was just talking about in terms of the 3 questions, and that's where you are using a piece of music out of context. In other words, it's not in situ, it's not in your original footage, but you put it in the edit because you want to talk about that particular song, right? And I want to show an example of a clip, actually from a documentary, I think it was in 2008. And this is actually a litigated example where documentary producers wanted to use 15 seconds from John Lennon's Imagine, which is pretty difficult to license. So we're going to see it used in context here. Okay, so these filmmakers came to our office and they said, well, we want to license this clip and we'll need to go to Yoko Ono in order to do that. And we said, I don't think Yoko Ono is going to approve this use. Obviously, because of the message and whether we agree with it or not, we want to facilitate, filmmakers to be able to use the music that they're legally entitled to do under the law. So we decided to work with fair use. One of the things that we recommended was put some lyrics in the lower third so that people can more easily understand the point that these filmmakers are trying to make with these particular lyrics in this context. They agreed to do it. We wrote an opinion, they got insurance. Within 2 weeks, Yoko Ono filed a lawsuit in the Southern District of New York. And usually in these contexts, we get an angry letter, we get an angry email, something like that, but Yoko Ono just went straight to court. And fortunately, the court in New York agreed with our position that it was fair use. And that case has actually been very foundational for the next 15 years in being able to use music pursuant to fair use, where you're making a point and the use is pretty limited, right? You're not using more than you need to get the point across. They didn't see this as a market substitute, right? You're not using the song for entertainment purposes. You're really just using it to make a point. So that's one type of fair use. The other type that we see is, let's just say you're shooting on the street. Let's say there's a parade out here on this street and you want to film what it's like to be in Woods Hole when a parade is going by. So there's cheerleaders and there's the Grand Marshal, and then the band comes along and starts playing some song that you don't know what it is, but it's a typical band song. You use 15 seconds of it because that's just what's happening on the street. You didn't tell the band to come play that song, right? This is what we say is incidental and fortuitous use. And this kind of use is protected under the law as well, right? So if it's limited in time, and you're not listening to the band, this doesn't become a concert film, right? We're just following the band for minutes and minutes, right? Then that's different. But if you as a filmmaker want to accurately convey to the viewer, this is what it's like to be in Woods Hole at this specific time. There happens to be a band. Maybe there's somebody playing guitar. Maybe we go down the street. A car drives past and we can hear the radio. Somebody's fiddling on the guitar. All of these things are protected uses where you can say, I just happen to be there and I'm faithfully showing you what happened. There's a strong case for fair use for that, right? Now, there are plenty of times when people want to go beyond that, right? Where, let's just say, we hear that person playing guitar, we see them playing guitar on the side of the road, we focus in on that person, we cut away, we still hear that song underneath the next interview. Now you're using that song as underscore. Now that's a creative use. You're using it out of context. Jonathan's shaking his head saying you have to license that, right? So these are the fine margins where if you're using it as it actually was captured and solely for that purpose, then it's very, very likely to be fair use.
What about if they were playing Imagine by John Lennon, the marching band? Still fair use?
In the same context?
Yeah.
Right. If you didn't tell them to play that, they just happen to be playing that, you might get sued again. But yeah, if you're just filming the band and that's what they happen to be playing and you don't hold on that shot forever, then you have a very good shot at that being fair use. That's right. Sure, yeah.
Sure. First, before we jump into questions, is there any terms or things that some people have heard us sort of casually chatting about that they didn't know what it meant, that they didn't know how it's applicable in any way? Anything that we can define for anybody? Please.
What I know what publishing rights are, and I know what master rights are, but I've heard
Sync, great question. As simple as your question is, sync is also the publishing rights. It's the same thing. Yep, it used interchangeably. Yep. Any other real simple sort of questions that maybe, okay, then
Right.
let's jump in.
Just one thing. So if you have a question, please raise your hand so we can bring you a mic because we're recording this, and so it'll go on there and everybody else can hear you. So, and John will bring you the microphone.
Okay.
We live in a litigious society. Should I be forming an LLC when I have a documentary film to protect my assets?
It's a good question, and I'm going to give you the lawyer answer and say it depends. It comes up every day, this question, and I will say I have clients who have, let's just say, 8 to 10 projects in development, and they've said, listen, every single one of these is going to get produced. I'm going to form 8 to 10 LLCs, and they've regretted that, right? The downside of that, just so that everyone knows, is that regardless of what state you live in, there's usually going to be a minimum tax that you have to pay to the estate, to the state. Some states are better than others. Some states are more business friendly to others, but the fact of the matter is you should plan on having to manage 8 to 10 LLCs at that time and drafting 8 to 10 operating agreements. And then, to the extent that an LLC is more than just you have to figure out the business terms of, you and your other managing member, let's just say. So there is a lot of maintenance and upkeep and potentially taxes that you have to think about when forming an LLC. So what I often say is if you don't have a lawyer at that time, at least talk to your accountant about the implications of having a limited liability company, right? Now, the benefit of having an LLC is if you're using it truly as a business vehicle and you open up a bank account and you use it just as it was intended to be used. In other words, it's not a shell, right? It can still just be you operating behind that LLC, but if you're paying for crew or you shoot a sizzle and have to hire somebody to do that, or you hire a sound person, you enter agreements through that LLC, you pay people through that bank account, then you're treating it as a real business. And in that case, it does serve the protection that it's meant to have, right? So what I would say is it's different for everybody, but the point that I see is most convenient and most helpful for people is when you're doing real business transactions for a decent amount of money, where you don't, even if you know the person really well, I think that's probably the point at which you should start thinking about forming an LLC. Because the idea is, you mentioned we live in a litigious society. We live in the most litigious society on planet. If you get sued, you want that LLC to be the entity that is the appropriate entity to defend that lawsuit. So it protects your personal assets, right? But in order for that to happen, you have to treat it like a real business. Open a bank account, use that bank account for all of the transactions. Don't commingle funds. And what I mean is don't use your personal account. Always use that business account. Keep it separate. And it should serve the purpose that it was formed for. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thanks. So you mentioned if you had 10 films, you should have 10 LLCs. Could you have one LLC for your production company and have all those under that umbrella?
You could. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And by the way, I was using that as an example of things you don't want to do. The 8 to 10 LLCs, I've more often seen clients regret the fact that they opened that many because it's just too many to manage. If they formed them in California, there's a minimum tax of $800 per LLC, no matter what happens. Let's just say it lays dormant. You didn't do anything with it. You just formed it. It cost you several $100s to form it. Nothing happens with that particular project for that year. You still have to pay taxes on it. And then there's other things that you have to do as formalities when it comes to filing and making sure that you're up to date with the Secretary of State. So as long as you're comfortable with all of those things, you can do it. But very often people don't think about doing that, because you mentioned an LLC. It's the most flexible type of business, right? It's more flexible than an S corp. It's different from a partnership in the sense that you can, especially for an independent film production, where people who are putting in sweat equity to the film can own all or a portion of the company. With corporations, it's a lot less flexible when you're, apportioning shares. So that's all to say, you need to think about all the factors, including the taxes that you might pay on those LLCs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I have a question. Thank you. This has been amazing already. If you're in a situation where you have hired a composer, the composer still owns their material, but you've licensed, their music for your film. You mentioned also that like Netflix would want to buy the world and want to have it not be a license. So how do you navigate that? Would that be a point where Netflix is like, well, you don't own the music, so we don't want this movie anymore? Or then do you have to go back to the composer and say, actually, can you just give, we don't want to license it anymore. We want the movie to own it, or we want Netflix to own it. Like, how would you navigate that so that you don't prevent yourself from being able to sell the movie to a streamer like that?
It's a great question. So with independently financed films, so this example is, well, let's go back to that $750,000 example where it's not being commissioned by Netflix or a broadcaster, HBO, any of those. You find an investor, you raise enough money through grants to produce the film. You find a composer, they license the music to you. Let's say you take it to Netflix after going to a festival and they're very interested in buying it. They're going to have a different perspective on the music or a different requirement for the music than if you were commissioning it. So in my experience, we've worked on plenty of films where we just licensed the composed music and licensed it or even sold it to those streamers, and they're okay with that. The issue is when it gets commissioned at the outset, they're going to have a very, very specific list of things that you need with the music rights. And one of those is we want to buy out of the music. And every buyer is a little bit different. Like Apple will require a little bit more than Netflix, for example. But for the most part, they want to own the music. But if you come to them later with a completed film, they're more sympathetic. And they understand, okay, you're working on a limited budget. You needed to hire this composer. We'll live with it. But it does bring up a good point. And maybe you can speak to this a little bit, Jonathan, is we've been talking about worldwide, all media in perpetuity. One of the other things that I've found to be complicated with licensing music is ad and promo, right? And sometimes if there just wasn't the budget to license music for advertising and promotion, when it comes to the point of sale or license to a distributor, their marketing department then comes to the producer and says, we can't use any of this music in a trailer. Like, what are we supposed to do? So have you found that, what's your strategy there? Sometimes with ad and promo, is it a good idea to license some of the music for ad and promo, maybe a couple tracks for what's called out of context use?
So there's something called out of context versus in context. And typically when we're securing music rights, it includes in context rights for promos and trailers. Meaning you could use that song that we've licensed for your film in a trailer, but it must stay in the same visual context as it is in the film. You can't take it out of context. You can't continue to use the song beyond how you use it in the film itself. Now, out of context rights, it's much more expensive than licensing a song in a film. Often it can be 10, 20, 30 times the amount, because when you're licensing music for a promo, it's like an advertisement. and the eyeballs on it is much larger than a film. In all seriousness, if it's on YouTube and social media and things, it can go global and millions of people will watch it. And unfortunately, some of the indie docs and indie films don't get millions of people watching them. So it's much more expensive. So it depends on the song. If it's a small independent song and they're sort of not savvy to music licensing, we will try to sneak kind of that right in and get it, and we'll ask for it, and sometimes we'll get it. But typically any record company, any major company and big independent record label is not going to give you out of context rights. They're going to want a separate fee for it. And they don't often give you like the ability to get an option on that number. They can a few weeks, months later after it's cleared. You can go back to them and then ask them at that point. Mm-hmm. But it's typically challenging to get it right up front. So, yeah. But for score, sometimes for score, we'll want to have it for all rights.
Yeah.
And so then you could use your score out of context from how it's used in the actual film itself. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I have a definition question that I missed earlier, and maybe you talked about it earlier. I used to always think of music supervisor as someone who was involved in the creative part as possibly as well as the legal. I never distinguished that. What's the title for someone who is involved in the creative decisions, like what did you call those things that come out of music, those little stems, like choosing which stems? What would the title of that person be?
And that's going to be your music editor, typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then quick question is, how does YouTube know whether or not you have rights to a song? If they like, for instance, I have a short on YouTube and they stopped it because they said I don't have rights. But they never asked me. They never called me and said, do you have rights to this? How do they know if I do or not?
Well, as I understand it, YouTube now has deals with a lot of the publishers, right? And they have programs that can identify automatically when a given user is using the music. And often it can result in a takedown notice, right? If you're using music that's infringing, then there's this whole counter takedown. No, I'm using it under fair use. And they can say, no, you aren't. They're going to go back and forth. But often it can result in a monetization process where if there is, through the use of ads, Google ads on YouTube, if there are enough views of your project or whatever you have in that video, and it is generating money through Google ads, that they will get the money and not you, because it flagged the use of that song. So this has all just happened in the last few years, where it's almost become 100% automated.
Then why did they take it down? Why did they stop it instead of?
Well, there's not, as I understand, it's not always a takedown, right? Anybody who sees or is aware of a potential infringement can, if they fill out a form, say that it's infringing, right? And if it doesn't go through that process, you can still monetize it, right? Yeah.
How you doing? I'm making the music for a documentary right now, and I'm using a drum machine. And sometimes the drum machines come with factory sounds. How does that work in terms of the legal do you need the legal rights for that as well?
It's a great question. My understanding is when you buy that drum machine, it comes with certain sounds, and you have rights to do and exploit it in any which way you want to do it. Would you concur, Counsel?
You'd probably you probably have more experience in that than I do, but my experience is producers think that the systems that they're working with, that those are cleared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks for this super helpful, sorry to make you run. I have a very specific question about a shot that I have in something I'm cutting right now. It's in the back of a kitchen, and the staff in the kitchen, sous chef and other people are humming and singing their songs. There's a song going on in the background, and it kind of feels like your band example a little bit. But do I have a limitation in an amount of seconds I can use in that? And the music is going on in the background of the kitchen.
Yeah.
So help.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the way you've described it sounds like it is a very strong possibility of fair use. It's just a matter of how long you stay on that shot, right? Now, unfortunately, there's no black and white rule about the number of seconds. But what I would say is, at what point do you watch that or I watch it and I think, well, this is now just being used for entertainment value. The entertainment value of the song itself, right? And often that can depend on a number of different factors, right? What's actually happening in that scene? Do we need to see other things that are unfolding in that scene that are important as a filmmaker for you to show? Maybe the song is really, like, we can barely even tell what the song is, so we start thinking, part of the fair use analysis is, does it act as a replacement for the song itself, right? And so if you can barely hear it, if it's a tinny version of it, they're humming it, it's not,
This subjectivity is freaking me out. But
Yes.
but I will say that I'm using it often to show collegiality and how they're really connected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how long do you think? I mean, like a minute? Less. Okay, then I feel good about that.
I'll be calm.
Yes. What I feel good about it because often the way that people frame the question is, I want to use this song because it sounds cool and it just happens to be in this context. The way you framed the question was very, very different because it's instrumental to your characters and the story that you want to tell. And often that's 95% of it, really. It's just where, and again, the example that I gave, it's just obviously not okay, is where that music starts bleeding into the next interview, right? So
The other curveball is that it's all about risk. And let's say it happens to be Led Zeppelin or Daddy Yankee or Bad Bunny. And Bad Bunny's signed to Epic Records. And let's say that your end title is also with that particular record company. And you've engaged me and I'm already licensing that end title song for you. Sometimes Chris and I would actually have a discussion about it with you, and we would say, well, we're already doing business with Sony Records, and in this case, because that's a such and such song, Bad Bunny, which they own, and they're very sensitive and litigious, maybe we have it in the budget. You know what? Let's clear the publishing on it. It's a safer bet. And that is often a conversation, we have there. So there is a gray area that occurs. And though you are comfortable writing that letter and saying it is fair use, it might just not be worth some of the troubles.
right, exactly.
So there's a lot of gray here. But blue skies here.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm in pre-production for a docuseries, and I sort of have this, because I'm a first-time filmmaker, so I probably have like lots of delusions, but I have this delusion that if I want to use music from a band that's not very popular at all, that they might actually want me to use their music and therefore make it less expensive because not a lot of people know the song, and so that if like people watch this docuseries, people learn about the band. Is that like a completely unheard of phenomenon?
No. It's definitely a possibility. But you don't always know who owns the music. And it could be a third party that has invested money in recording that band. It also could be a cover song, perhaps, or within their repertoire. And that, again, is owned by someone else. So you have to do the due diligence, and you have to get a sign-off. And in that case, what I would do if I was working with you is I would say, let's do a blanket deal. Let's make an agreement with all their songs and say we have the ability to edit and use these songs, all media in perpetuity, in and out of context, and see, and in exchange for a flat fee of $1,000, and then if our project gets sold to a major streaming service such as Netflix, Hulu, blah, 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 we'll pay you another $1,000 or something. That's the kind of deal that I would personally want to structure. Gives you maximum flexibility editing and cutting, allows you to use the song for the trailers, and doesn't put any limitations on it. And you could change that number to gratis, but I don't feel comfortable, and all of us are creatives in this room, to ask someone to do something for free because you think what you're going to do is going to make them more popular. It might, and I hope it does, but they're creatives and they should be paid something, for their work, and that's how I see it.
That's great. Thank you.
The last thing I want to say is we license all the music that we use in the Woods Hole Film Festival from the musicians directly. We only get it from people who write the music and have ownership of it. So that's another thing to think about too, is, you may see stuff that we put on the screen, that's all licensed. It matters because everybody needs to get paid and everybody needs to feel that they're not being exploited in a bad way.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, here he. Great question. The best way to get in touch with me, 2 ways. Through Instagram, my company is Fine, F-I-N-E, Gold Music. And then on LinkedIn, directly to me on LinkedIn, which is just my name, Jonathan Finegold. And again, it's Finegold. And just make sure you say Woods Hole so that I remember.
Yeah. Same, DCP Law on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn as well, Chris Perez. Yeah, DCP Law on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Perez. With a little green and white logo, DCP Law. Oh, my wife knows my Instagram.
DCP Firm.
DCP Firm.
But we can exchange all this information. I just want to thank Chris and Jonathan for being here today, sharing all their wisdom and knowledge. And if you do have more questions, they've generously offered some time tomorrow. You can sign up at the back of the room to have a 20-minute meeting with either of them. And if there's time and slots available, both if you need to, just sign up at the back of the room. And you can get a little time with these guys tomorrow.
And if you, it's from 11 to 12. If you see us in the streets, grab us. We're happy to chat. And then don't forget, grab your ticket. And on top, Chris is 1 to 5, and I'm on the bottom. Jonathan, 1 to 5.
Don't forget to vote.
That's a joke.
Thank you.
Thanks again. We have another masterclass at 2 o'clock with Brad Silberling. He'll be here to share.